When Diane Harmon from the HOA decided to cut off my irrigation system, she thought she was just teaching me a lesson. What she didn't expect was to turn the whole neighborhood into an uncontrolled river. Now, with flooded houses and angry neighbors, she's trying to shift the blame. But the security cameras tell a different story. The first time I heard about her was through a flyer that appeared in my mailbox. A glossy sheet full of ridiculous rules that looked like they had been written by someone who had never set foot in tea. He earth without wearing designer gardening gloves. Rules for a harmonious neighborhood, the title read. It had to be a joke. My irrigation system had been installed years ago, perfectly adjusted to keep my lawn and garden alive without wasting water. But apparently, Diane from the HOA, the one with her perfectly coiffed hair and a look of superiority that could kill an ox, thought I was using resources irresponsibly. 3 notices later, I received a letter with a more aggressive tone. Last warning. If the system is not shut down, measures will be taken. And that's when I realized I wasn't dealing with someone normal. This was the kind of person who believes that reigning over a neighborhood is the pinnacle of human power. Someone who has nothing better to do than measure the height of fences and count how many leaves fall in other people's yards. And worst of all, someone who thinks they know more about hydraulic systems than someone who has actually studied and installed one. The problem? Diane knew absolutely nothing about plumbing. She's a menace waiting to happen, warned my neighbor Marcus Torres, leaning over my fence the day after I received the final notice. Marcus was a retired civil engineer who'd worked for the city's water department for 30 years before moving to our community. This irrigation system is part of a larger drainage network, isn't it? He asked, eyeing the control box with professional interest. Exactly, I replied. The developer installed it to help manage groundwater throughout the subdivision. If someone messes with one system, it could compromise the entire neighborhood's drainage. Marcus finished, shaking his head. Have you shown Diane the system plans? I laughed bitterly. She won't look at them. Says it's just technical jargon I made up to avoid compliance. Marcus frowned. I'll try talking to her at the next HOA meeting. Perhaps another professional voice might help. But Diane wasn't interested in professional opinions that contradicted her own views. At the meeting, when Marcus tried to explain the integrated nature of our neighborhood's water management system, she cut him off. Mr. Torres, with all due respect to your past employment, she said with a dismissive wave, our HOA guidelines clearly state that individual irrigation systems cannot operate more than 3 days per week, and Mr. Jenkins' system runs daily. That's because it's not just an irrigation system. Marcus tried again. The matter is closed for discussion, Diane interrupted, banging her gavel with theatrical finality. The night it all happened, I was indoors watching TV and enjoying the silence of my own property when I heard a strange sound coming from outside, a dry pop followed by the sound of water running where it shouldn't be. I went outside to see what was happening, and there, crouching next to my irrigation system, was Diane, the president of the HOA, with a cheap flashlight stuck to her forehead and a wrench in her hand, twisting a pipe as delicately as someone trying to open a jar of pickles. The horror of incompetence was palpable. She looked at me and widened her eyes as if I were the criminal there, as if I were the intruder in my own home. You can't do this, I said. Diane took a deep breath, trying to regain her pose of authority, but it seemed difficult when she was all muddy and with water splashing straight into her face. You can't waste water. It's against HOA rules. So that was that. She thought she was doing a good deed, as if I were a cartoon villain wasting water while laughing evilly. I tried to explain. I told her that the system was regulated to be efficient, that it prevented waste by keeping the irrigation on at strategic times, that I knew what I was doing. But the HOA is never interested in reality. From the corner of my eye, I could see Marcus emerging from his house, likely drawn by the commotion. He was moving quickly toward us, alarm evident in his expression. Stop, he shouted, waving frantically. Diane, don't touch that valve. Diane snorted, turned the wrench one last time, and then everything went to hell. A loud pop followed by the most hysterical scream I've ever heard. The main pipe broke, and with it, all the pressure from a system that had been set up to work perfectly. Water started gushing out as if someone had punctured a fire hydrant, creating a jet high enough to wet the roof. She fell on her butt on the floor, panting, trying to understand what had just happened. But the worst was yet to come, because the irrigation system was linked to something much bigger. Did the HOA want to save water? Well, now, they were going to have too much water, and in a matter of minutes, The whole neighborhood was going to feel it. Marcus arrived at my side, his face grim. This is exactly what I was afraid of. He muttered, surveying the rapidly worsening situation. She's compromised the entire system. The sound of the gushing water was so loud that you could hear it echoing through the neighborhood. I stood still for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Diane, still lying on the ground, was looking up at the sky as if God was about to give her a personal sermon. But God didn't need to worry. I was going to do it. But before I could say anything, I realized something worse. The water pressure wasn't decreasing. In fact, it was increasing. Because here's the detail that the HOA didn't bother to understand. My irrigation system wasn't just an irrigation system. It was part of the neighborhood's underground drainage network. One wrong adjustment here, and it could turn into total chaos. And that's exactly what happened. Somewhere down there, underneath the well-kept grounds of the HOA's perfectly identical houses, water was building up, putting pressure on the pipes that were installed decades ago, before any of these idiots had the bright idea to create a community aesthetics committee. Marcus was already on his phone, frantically dialing. "We need emergency services," he barked into the device. "The subdivision's main drainage system has been compromised at 1142 Maple Street." "Yes, that's right. We're looking at potential flash flooding across multiple properties." Diane finally managed to stand up. She was soaking wet, her hair dripping with water. Her once perfectly aligned makeup, now looking like a tasteless abstract painting. But she still tried to act as if she had control of the situation. This is your fault," she sputtered, pointing an accusing finger at me. I blinked. "My fault. Your system. You built it the wrong way." I looked at the chaos going on around me. At the gush of water that was now turning my sidewalk into a private lake, at the current that was beginning to spread across the street, sliding downhill as if it were escaping from a newly burst dam. And then I looked at her, the person who was literally holding a wrench in her hand, stuck in the wreckage of the pipe she herself had broken. "Let me get this straight," I said, crossing my arms. "You invade my property, tamper with something you don't understand, completely destroy the system, and now you want to say it's my fault." She opened her mouth as if to reply, but was interrupted by a loud pop. And then we heard it. The first bang came from a next-door neighbor's house, the second from a street below. In a matter of seconds, the old pipes in the neighborhood began to explode one by one, like a chain reaction. "It's backflowing into the residential connections," Marcus explained grimly, his expertise making the situation even more alarming. "When she broke your control valve, it created a pressure surge throughout the entire system. The water has nowhere to go but up, through people's homes. The groundwater, which had previously been directed correctly by the system I had installed, now had nowhere to go, so it found the easiest way up through the residents' houses. The sidewalks began to crack. The streets were covered in muddy water. The houses below my property, the ones with the neatly trimmed gardens, the impeccable white fences, the garden decorations that looked like they had been picked out of a magazine catalog, were now slowly being swallowed up by an accidental flood. I heard the first scream from a neighbor and knew the fun was just beginning. Diane's eyes widened, finally realizing that things had gotten completely out of hand. Oh no. "Oh yes," I replied, pointing to the mess. She stumbled back, pulling out her cell phone as if the HOA had a private emergency service to solve this kind of catastrophe. But what did she think she was going to say? "Hello, committee?" "Yes, I just turned the neighborhood into a Titanic set. Can you fix it?" "This is going to affect at least 20 homes," Marcus said, surveying the disaster with the trained eye of an engineer. "The houses on the north side will get it worst. They're downhill from the main pressure point." The doors of the houses began to open. Residents came out, first confused, then horrified. One couple pointed at the knee-deep water. Another woman shouted that her basement was filling up. And then came the noise I'd been waiting for, the sirens. First the fire department, then the police. In a matter of minutes, the street was full of emergency vehicles trying to understand how. In a neighborhood where the biggest emergency last month was a fight over the color allowed for garage doors, we now had a real flood. Diane was desperately trying to look innocent, but the neighbors wanted answers. And that's when one of them pointed at my security cameras. "Hey, do you have recordings of that?" She turned her face toward me so fast that I thought she was going to dislocate her neck. Now she realized my security system recorded everything, and it was all there in high definition. The HOA couldn't blame an old pipe. It couldn't make up any excuse. The recording clearly showed Diane breaking into my system, turning the wrench like a lunatic, and then being bathed in her own incompetence. I cracked a smile. But of course I do. The silence that followed was beautiful. Diane swallowed. The neighbors began to murmur. One of the policemen looked at her and then at me. Can we see that recording? Officer Jensen. Marcus stepped forward, identifying himself. I'm Marcus Torres, retired civil engineer from the city water department. I can confirm that the flooding is a direct result of tampering with a critical drainage component. And I witnessed the entire incident. Diane's eyes widened even further. She hadn't realized that there had been another witness, and not just any witness, but one with professional credentials that would demolish any defense she might try to construct. Diane tried to intervene. She tried to say that it was all a big misunderstanding. But no one else was listening. She had done exactly what she wanted to do. She had changed the whole neighborhood, just not in the way she had planned. And now she was going to pay for it. Officer, she said desperately, you have to understand that as HOA president, I have a responsibility to enforce our water conservation regulations. Mr. Jenkins has been warned multiple times about excessive usage. So if your solution was breaking and entering, the officer asked incredulously. It's not breaking and entering when it's HOA business. She insisted, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. A neighbor I recognized as Dr. Patel from 3 doors down stepped forward. My medical practice has water damage to patient records. This is beyond an HOA matter. This is criminal negligence. The recording was watched by the policeman right there in front of everyone. A bunch of soaked neighbors huddled around the cell phone, while sirens blared in the background and firefighters tried to deal with what was now officially a disaster caused by sheer stupidity. The video showed everything. Diane invading my property, opening my irrigation system with the delicacy of a drunken gorilla, turning the wrench with no idea what she was doing, and finally being knocked down by her own failure when the water exploded right in her face. It was a work of art. The silence that followed was filled with pure, absolute guilt. She looked around, her eyes darting from one neighbor to another, as if trying to find someone who was still on her side. No one was. One of the most affected neighbors, a man I only knew by sight, the guy who always walked past mowing the lawn with military precision, crossed his arms and said, "So you did it." The woman who, until 5 minutes ago, walked around with the posture of a queen dictating laws, suddenly looked like a child caught stealing candy before dinner. It wasn't like that. She stammered. But nobody wanted to hear it. "My garage is full of water," shouted another neighbor. "My basement too. Who's going to pay for that?" "My daughter's wedding dress was in storage downstairs," cried Mrs. Chun from across the street. "It's ruined. Ruined." Marcus moved through the crowd, offering his professional assessment to neighbors and emergency personnel alike. The damage is structural in several cases. I overheard him telling the fire chief. Foundation issues are likely, especially in the older homes at the bottom of the cul-de-sac. And it was at that very moment that things really started to fall apart for Diane. Because until then, this woman had lived in a world where she dictated the rules, where the HOA could levy absurd fines, create ridiculous regulations, and make everyone toe the line just because they had signed a contract the moment they bought their homes. But the HOA is not the government. It's not the police. It has no power when the shit hits the fan. And now that the houses were flooding, the fire department was involved, and a dozen residents wanted her head on a platter, she realized that there was no more regulation that could save her. The policeman finally put his cell phone back in his pocket and looked at her. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us for clarification." It was then that desperation struck. She began to speak rapidly, the words stumbling over each other. "This is a misunderstanding. It was an accident. I was just following HOA rules." But that's when someone, one of the neighbors who hated her as much as I did, probably, unleashed the sentence that sealed her fate. "Do you really think the HOA has the power to control the city's water supply?" Diane froze. The realization hit her. Because yes, she had spent years terrorizing residents, handing out ridiculous fines, and forcing everyone to follow senseless rules. But now she had caused a real disaster, and no one, absolutely no one, was going to pretend that it wasn't her fault. "Actually," Marcus added, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "tampering with municipal water infrastructure is a federal offense. The EPA takes a very dim view of unauthorized modifications to systems that impact watershed management." Federal offense? Diane's voice was barely a whisper now. This was clearly spiraling far beyond what she had anticipated. The policeman gestured to the patrol car. Please, ma'am. She looked around, hoping that someone would say something on her behalf. Nothing. No neighbors. No HOA members. Not even her perfect husband, who always showed up with her at meetings to agree with everything that came out of her mouth. Alone. Finally realizing that she had dug her own grave. So with no choice, no allies, no authority whatsoever, she walked to the police car. And when the car door closed, the whole neighborhood erupted in murmurs and disguised smiles. But me? I wasn't finished yet, because the HOA as a whole was going to pay for it too. The firefighters spent the next 6 hours draining the water from the streets, basements, and garages. The neighborhood had never seen so much chaos. People ran around trying to save boxes, carpets, and furniture. Some neighbors were trying to unclog drains and gutters, while others were simply pissed off watching what were once well-kept backyards now turned into muddy swamps. And in the middle of it all, me, the only one who wasn't affected at all. Fate has a perfect sense of humor, because Diane wanted to teach me a lesson. She wanted me to stop wasting water. And now half the houses in the HOA were flooded, while mine remained exactly as it was. And you know what? She hadn't even paid the beginning of the price. The morning after the flood, Marcus organized an impromptu neighborhood meeting in his driveway, one of the few dry spots remaining. Folks, he addressed the gathering of shell-shocked homeowners. What happened yesterday wasn't just Diane's personal vendetta against a neighbor. It represents a systemic failure of HOA governance and a dangerous overreach of authority. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. As your neighbor and as someone with 30 years of experience in municipal water systems, I'm offering my services to help document the engineering aspects of this disaster for your insurance claims and any legal actions you may pursue. A tall man in a soggy business suit stepped forward. Richard Goldstein, a corporate attorney whose basement home theater had been completely destroyed. I think we need to go further than individual claims, he announced. This calls for a class action lawsuit against both Diane personally and the HOA as an entity. That's when the real movement began. As soon as the firemen finished stabilizing the situation, I went straight to the lawyer. Not just any lawyer, one of those sharks. A guy who lives to crush arrogant people who think they know everything. So what do? We sue the HOA for trespassing, for property damage, for criminal destruction. And just to make sure the case stayed interesting, we sued Diane herself individually, so that she would also pay out of her own pocket for what she had done. And it wasn't just me. The neighbors, furious at the damage, began to join me. In a matter of 3 days, 20 families filed lawsuits against the HOA and against Diane. But not everyone united against her. A small faction of residents, mostly those who had served on committees with Diane or benefited from her selective enforcement of rules, began to push back. This witch hunt has gone too far, declared Pamela Winston at the emergency HOA meeting held in the community center's remaining dry corner. Diane was just trying to enforce our collective standards. She made a mistake, yes. But destroying our entire association over one incident seems extreme. Marcus stood up immediately. A mistake? 27 homes have water damage. 3 families are in hotels. The Jacobson's Foundation may need to be completely rebuilt. This wasn't a mistake, it was criminal negligence. The room erupted into shouting, revealing the deep fissures that had been growing in our community long before the pipes burst. And then the bombshell came. The HOA didn't have enough money to cover everything. They were using residents' fees to pay for everything. But as we found out later, a lot of that money was disappearing. And where was it going to? Diane. During the discovery phase of the lawsuit, our shark lawyer uncovered financial records showing that Diane had been diverting HOA funds to pay for consultation services from a company called Harmon Home Services, a shell corporation registered. Read to her brother-in-law. That's how it all blew up for good. The police opened an investigation into the HOA. They discovered financial fraud, and in less than a month, the association was dissolved. It was over. No ridiculous regulations. No absurd fines. No woman with a clipboard telling me what can and can't be done on my property. What about Diane? Well, she lost her house. There were so many lawsuits against her that she was forced to sell everything to pay the damages. And the icing on the cake? When the new owners moved in, guess what was the first thing they did? They installed a brand new irrigation system. Because well-used water has never been the problem. It was always her problem. The destruction of the HOA was swift, quick, and beautiful to watch. It didn't take long for the lawyers to move in like a pack of wolves sniffing for blood. The association's money disappeared faster than dignity at a condo meeting. The fund that was supposed to cover community improvements was drained by lawsuits, compensation, and court costs. And Diane? Well, she went down with it. The court didn't even need long to decide. With the recordings, the testimonies, and the flood of lawsuits coming in from all sides, the judge took one look at the case and practically threw her into the fire without needing a match. She was held directly responsible for the damage caused by the flood and had to pay such a large amount of compensation that, honestly, I felt a little sorry for her. Just kidding. Not sorry at all. She tried to appeal, of course. She tried to say that she was just applying the HOA rules, that she didn't know this would happen, that it was an accident. But then the neighborhood lawyer, an old guy who must have been tired of dealing with these kinds of people, calmly stood up and said, "Mom, what part of don't touch what you don't understand didn't you understand?" And with that, it was over. The sentence came, and along with it, the final destruction of Diane's comfortable life. The HOA was officially dissolved. That means all that ridiculous regulatory crap has gone to waste. Goodbye fines for planting the wrong color flowers. Goodbye warnings for misaligned fences. Goodbye authoritarian control from a woman who thought she was mayor of a neighborhood that nobody asked for. Without the HOA, we have an opportunity to rebuild as a true community. Marcus said at the final gathering of neighbors, now held in what used to be the HOA's meeting room, "I propose we form a simple neighborhood association. No fees, no fines. Just neighbors helping neighbors." The contrast between his vision and Diane's regime couldn't have been more stark. Most residents eagerly signed on to the new, voluntary organization. And Diane? She lost everything. Her husband dumped her before the trial was even over. She sold the house before the bank took it. She disappeared without a trace. And what about me? I did exactly what any sensible person would do. I bought her land. Yes, I bought the house she was so protective of. Not that I wanted to live in it, of course not. I just wanted the satisfaction of knowing that that space would never again be controlled by an HOA or any other clipboard despot. And what did I do with the land? I turned it into a beautiful, vast community garden. The neighbors loved it. Now, where once stood the house of a woman who ruled with an iron fist, there's a place where people can grow whatever they want without anyone trying to shove ridiculous rules down their throats. And the best part? I've installed a new irrigation system, more modern, more powerful, more efficient. And just in case, I put a big sign on the side warning. If you don't understand hydraulics, don't touch what isn't yours. You know, Marcus told me one evening as we surveyed the thriving community garden that had once been Diane's pristine lawn. This whole disaster ended up bringing the neighborhood together in ways I never expected. He was right. Without the oppressive rules of the HOA, neighbors were actually talking to each other, helping each other rebuild, and creating something organic and authentic rather than the sterile, regulated community Diane had envisioned. And so the HOA died, and my water kept flowing exactly as it should be. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.